the Museum of Curiosity. And every week, I end this theme tune with a slightly different flourish. This week, I'll be ending with the unexpected minor key.
Hello, my name's John Lloyd, and I'm the Professor of Ignorance at the University of Buckingham. With me, as always, is the museum's curator, continuity announcer, and resident lounge pianist, Mr. Bill Bailey.
Thank you very much.
The Museum of Curiosity, as we shall discover later, is large enough to contain the entire universe, as Bill Bailey here can explain.
Yes, I'd like to think of the museum as a great big, hungry leveret of curiosity sucking on the teat of wisdom.
Each week, we invite 3 members of the museum's extensive and learned steering committee to help us top our empty plinths with objects of delight. Today, we're honoured to have with us the astrophysicist, Dr. John Gribbin, a sometime theology professor and a full-time hermit, Martha Reeves, and Arsenal fan, Dr. Alan Davis. First, John Gribbin is a visiting fellow in astronomy at the University of Sussex and a best-selling author. His latest is called The Universe, a Biography. John, when you first considered offering something to the museum, you suggested James Lovelock.
Well, Jim's best known as the father, or whatever you want to call it, of the idea of Gaia, that the Earth is a single living organism, in the same way that all the cells in your body make up one living organism. And through this idea, he's developed a profound understanding of how the different bits interact with one another. And most recently, he's become more concerned than practically anybody else. And that's saying something about the threat of global warming and just what could happen in about 50 years' time if the world reaches what's commonly called a tipping point and goes into a very hot state from which it'll be very difficult to get out again.
Is that when Scotland gets independence?
Absolutely.
Isn't one of his ideas that the British Isles will be one of the few habitable places in the world?
Yes!
It's not good, Alan. The problem is that there's a problem of immigration on a scale of about 6 billion people.
So is humanity a kind of virus in this organism?
Well, it could be thought of. I mean, Jim has argued this, that we're a kind of a plague that's, as a virus can, makes a body overheat. We're making the planet overheat, and the effect of the overheating will be to wipe us out, which is one of the things that running a fever does if you get ill. So it could be that the fever will kill us off, get rid of our technological civilization, and then all the other animals and birds and plants will get on with things and think, well, that was better off without them.
What's this idea about iron filings in the sea?
There's an idea that you could fertilise the oceans by putting iron into them, and that would make all the plankton bloom. They'd absorb lots of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, and then when they die, they'd sink to the bottom of the ocean and carry the carbon down there with them. At the moment, the problem is that it seems to be very short-lived, and that the stuff doesn't fall down to the bottom of the sea. It gets eaten by other things, so the carbon stays up here. But it could work, who knows?
Whose idea is it?
It was mine.
Is your... You are modest. Time's an interesting thing. So I'm going to ask you, what is time?
Well, I think it's what's called a block universe, the idea that all times do exist, and last Thursday is still there. It's at last Thursday, just as New York's still in America, even though we're not in New York. Albert Einstein subscribed to this view. I mean, he regarded time as an illusion, or the passage of time is just an illusion.
I just love the fact that you asked that question, John. I'm on Never Mind the Buzzcocks. I'm used to hearing questions like, so you've just been on tour with Take That. And now, what is time? When were you on tour with Take That?
You've got a question.
Yeah. I haven't been on tour with Take That, but I have been on a hip-hop record with Digitech.
Oh, have you? Wow, that's slipped below my cultural radar.
Where did the recording happen?
Well, for the purposes of my vocal, for want of a better term, I had to stand in a cupboard because the acoustics were best in there.
So they told you.
That's what they told me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. John Gribbin. Our next guest is Martha Reeves. Martha is a scholar, a translator, and an internationally published author. She calls herself an irrevocably professed solitary and pickler of red herrings. Every year, she withdraws completely from society to a remote beach in Alaska, where she lives as a hermit for 6 months, fishing, meditating, and contemplating the stars. Martha, what is a solitary?
Well, a solitary who is committed to solitude has found something very spacious and very seductive in the silence, and this has become irresistible.
So did some sort of have some sort of epiphany when you were small? Or
I did.
What happened?
Well, it's something that happens to most people at some point in their life. I was in Washington, D.C., and our kindergarten class was taken over to the National Cathedral, and we came out into the crossing. And at that moment, I left. I departed, and when I returned to myself, as they say, I knew that whatever that was what my life was about.
Where did you go?
I didn't go anywhere. I disappeared inside.
Would that be like, to crudely call it, an out-of-body experience? Was it?
No, it was very much in the body.
Right.
But it was...
Pay attention, Bill, pay attention. She's going inside.
Sorry, I was just sounding more like a hallucination.
No, it was very much in the body, and I was perfectly attending to what I was observing. This is very common in Zen, Buddhism.
Have you ever meditated, Alan?
When I go to the theatre.
Right. Sit perfectly still.
Hours. And then about halfway through I have a Magnum, and then I meditate for the whole of the second half.
What does the word God mean to you?
Nothing.
Really?
No, it's. I think it's poor old God. It's the most abused word in the language, and the worst thing about it is.
Aren't you going to get drummed out of the church?
No, not at all. Oh, I might get burned at the stake.
What does the Archbishop of Canterbury say when you say things like that?
Well, he's.
Pull yourself together, Martha.
Oh, he's used to it by now.
Do you think that Jesus was actually the Son of God?
What do you mean by the Son of God?
Well,
a metaphorical son of a conceptual entity, John. And why Alaska though? Is that because of the wonderful silence?
I went to Alaska because I find the combination of sea and mountains and being cut off from the road system absolutely irresistible. It's an incredible environment, and you really lose any illusion that you have any control over the planet. If you go out into the Alaska wilderness with an iPod in your ears, you will be bare lunch very quickly.
Martha gave me a rather wonderful quotation, which I think is suits her very well, from Robert Runcie, which is, "The church is like a swimming pool. All the noise is at the shallow end." I think that's kind of interesting. That's Martha Reeves, ladies and gentlemen. Well, finally, Alan Davis, a man with an honorary doctorate from the University of Kent, is also a seasoned globetrotter, a keen scuba diver, and has written a regular column for The Times, yet somehow he still finds time to go to every single Arsenal game. So, Alan, what made you want to make people laugh for a living?
I think the adrenaline and the fear followed by great euphoria is quite addictive.
You know when they say you die on stage, you know when it's that bad. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes. If they're being quite heckly and you can interact with that, that's okay. It's worse when they're just quiet. Or, as happened to me once, one person turns to the other in the front row and says, "He's lost it."
If blokes heckle you, it's kind of like a bit of stags locking horns. It can be a bit of a kind of, sort of battle of wills. But if a woman heckles you, there's something incredibly emasculating about it. And she just called me down to the front of the stage. She went, "Just go home."
My favourite one of them was a comedian who should remain nameless. Told me a story about a gig where there was a guy in a wheelchair at the front, and he couldn't get his wheelchair out because he needed assistance because it was a very small venue. And halfway through his act, he pushed himself out of his wheelchair and crawled out of the room. He thought that was going badly, that one.
It's the best feeling, isn't it? I mean, I can think of very few feelings which I think what sort of thing you do, Martha, is probably higher than that. But getting lots of love.
What?
No. I mean, in terms of peak experiences, you know. That,
No.
no, you don't have those.
You don't want adrenaline.
No.
You give up experience.
Okay.
As we know it.
Right.
I advise strongly against that. I'm taking a stand for adrenaline.
I don't know if you're sitting in the Alaskan wilderness, there's a bear lumbering towards you. I mean, adrenaline levels will be off the graph.
Yeah, then it's really useful.
Quite like being excited. I don't feel excited very often.
Boo!
Yeah. People going boo, see, I like that. I quite like having hiccups when I was a kid because it was some sort of stimulus at least. I'm really profoundly easily bored, so I like the stimulus. I could never get into religion for that reason. And the same with science, in fact. Both presented to me in a way that was so boring, I didn't know what to do, except chemistry, in which you could do things with stuff that went bang or fizzed.
Not
or one time our chemistry teacher actually really badly burned his hands because he spilt something and his hands were steaming and he was gritting his teeth. Sit down and read your books, like that, and then he went to hospital. That was really exciting.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Davis. Well, now, we come to the meat of the programme, and let's find out what our guests would like to place in the museum. Mr. Curator.
Yes, thank you, Professor. The museum is now ready for the donations. That denotes the museum is now ready. So, Dr. Gribbin, what have you got for us?
I've got a fairly modest entry. I'd like to put the Big Bang in the universe. And we're pretty confident that there was a very dense beginning to the universe because we can see things that are moving apart. Galaxies are moving apart from one another. And fairly logically, if you look back in time at what we might call the beginning, everything was on top of each other and you had a point of infinite density. So it was something very, very small, very, very dense, very, very hot. And then something happened, a process called inflation. It took something smaller than a proton and made it the size of a grapefruit in a tiny fraction of a second, which is quite a neat trick. And then things slowed down. And more or less everything that's happened since is very straightforward. The thing expands, gravity pulls stuff together, you get galaxies and stars and eventually planets and people and so on. What's really interesting is what happens in that first split second from the size of the proton or smaller up to the size of the grapefruit. And that's what I'm calling the Big Bang. And we want to know what there was in there, in the grapefruit-sized thingy, that made the universe turn out the way it is. The kind of ordinary atomic matter. That makes up about 5% of the total mass of the universe. We know that there's also a lot of other dark matter because we can see the way it pulls on galaxies and tugs them around and makes them move together. And then there may be something even more mysterious called dark energy that's making the universe start to expand faster. Well, all of that stuff was there in the grapefruit. So if we can put the grapefruit in the museum and we can study it very carefully, then we can answer all these fundamental questions about what's going to happen to the universe. So I figure if we don't need a very big room, put a grapefruit in, you can manage that, I'm sure, Bill.
Is it an actual great size of a grapefruit?
It's just the size of a grapefruit. Yeah.
Kind of some sort of like a Raiders of the Lost Ark or plinth type one, that's what I'm thinking.
That would work very well. There's a slight problem, but it's expanding very rapidly. But you can cope with that, I should think.
Yeah, well, it's a kind of instantaneous. You'd have to just cover. There, this is the exhibit. There it is. Right now, I can move on. Yeah.
Isn't it rather hot, though? Wouldn't it be very hot?
It would be very hot, and it would be very massive, but because it would contain all the mass of the universe in the size of the grapefruit.
Well.
But curiously, it wouldn't have any energy because there's one of the most amazing and fascinating facts about the universe is that it's got no energy overall. The amount of energy in matter, the m in Einstein's E equals mc squared, is actually balanced by the negative energy of the gravity of all that matter.
So you're saying there's no energy in the universe?
None at all. That's how we think how the universe could come into being as this sort of tiny Planck thing.
Has anyone ever heard this before? Do you think he's all right? That's absolutely amazing. I mean, I find that...
When I say I've got no energy, I'll feel a bit better about myself.
But
Well, you're not alone in being amazed, because the guy who first worked this out back in the 1940s told Einstein about it, and he says, Einstein stopped dead in his tracks when I told him this, and since we were crossing the road, several cars had to swerve to avoid him.
Just to be clear, it's the Big Bang you're putting in, not the Big Bang theory.
No, the Big Bang, the actual
big...
physical thing, yeah, which, as we know, because of the way time works and that last Thursday's still there, the Big Bang's still there. You just got to go back in time and bring it into the museum.
Oh.
Does it have a colour, this? We're just getting the decor, get the curtains right, is it?
Well, it would be extremely, extremely hot. So
White hot,
it would be
blue
sort
hot.
of beyond white hot. Yeah, it'd probably be invisible, sort of super gamma rays and stuff like that.
When you say the universe, I want to get this right.
Go on.
Are we in the fingernail of a giant antiquity?
Well, now you're talking about what people call the multiverse these days. I mean,
No, I'm
people
talking
say,
about Men in Black 2. But I'm interested in the multiverse.
And we accept that in the museum, the Big Bang in the museum?
Yeah,
yes, right.
definitely.
Thank you very much. Bang. Thank you very much.
Alan Davis, what would you like to add to our collection?
Epping Forest.
All of it?
Yes.
Why?
Well, what I wanted to bring, because it's the most exciting thing close to... I grew up in Epping Forest, not actually in the forest.
In it, no.
So it was at the end of my road. And quite near to me was Loughton Camp. And Loughton Camp, we were told growing up, was an ancient earthworks, which has been in the forest since at least 1971, when I first saw it. But in fact, it's so old, it was the last home of Boadicea, or Boudica, as she's now known.
Yes.
And I was quite keen to preserve Loughton Camp and perhaps have it in the museum. When I mentioned this to the people at the museum, they said, that's rubbish, Boudica never lived in Epping Forest. I was a little bit deflated by that. But I've decided that I would like the whole of Epping Forest, because it has plenty going for it, and the earthworks are genuine. They date from 500 BC. There's been a forest there for 5,000 years. It's the largest uncultivated patch of land near any major city in the world. It's an extraordinary place. And I went to school at Staples Road Primary School. We were often invited to go into the forest to do bark rubbings, which is...
is that legal?
It is legal, and it's an admirable use of crayon. And then we were asked to bring something back, but you're never allowed to bring anything back that was alive. So it was only things that you could find on the forest floor. And people in my class brought back a burnt-out Ford Fiesta that was found there. The severed head of a taxi driver and a bin liner. And the best one of all was 4 dead drug dealers in a Range Rover, which took the whole class had to kind of bump it in.
Yeah. Yes, I like all the things that you can't actually do. These are things that are still illegal in Epping Forest. No trading, no removing turf or leaf mould, no picking flowers, no flying model aircraft, no using of metal detectors, no climbing trees. My favourite, no dancing in such a manner that may be a nuisance to the public.
Yeah. Bears out of the Happy Mondays is barred from the forest.
That's right, you get hit in the eye with a maraca. There's a lot of deer there as well, isn't there?
There are a lot of deer, but you never see them because they're elusive.
Yeah.
I've never seen a deer in the forest. If you approach, being kind of youthful and sort of Essexy, deer just leg it.
But hang on, I don't know, they're not that elusive. Insurance companies earmarked Epping Forest as a deer crash hotspot. In 2007, they pay out more than £21 million in claims due to car crashes involving deer.
Oh,
every
yeah,
year.
if you have an accident, you'd say a deer hit you. That's kind of well known. What happened? Oh, deer ran out. Just clipped me and then kind of limped off into the undergrowth. Another deer, Sarge. It's 21 this week.
Yeah. Have you not had third-party foreign deer on your... It's a huge problem. I know about this. I'm not familiar with the problem in the Epping Forest, but certainly in the New Forest, it's a huge problem. A red deer will write off a car. It will just trash it, and it's a big problem. And,
Mainly because they can't properly drive, can they? Once they're in, they've got their heads down, the antlers are against the windscreen. They're wrestling with the steering wheel with those cloven hooves.
All over the place.
Almost inevitably, they skew off into the road. Then they get out and they say to the officer, "Deer run out." Yeah, they got no loyalty to their own.
Well, it's obviously such an interesting forest, Alan. Thank you very much for your suggestion.
If I put Epping Forest in the museum, well, does that mean it's then in the museum?
I don't know whether we can do that. I think we're going to have to put the museum in Epping Forest.
That would be the thing.
Good.
Yeah, museum in Epping Forest. Thank you very much.
So, lastly, Martha Reeves, may we have your submission, please?
I would like to put silence in the museum. Not just any silence, but the silence that's the mother of curiosity. The thing is, we evolved with silence, core silence, to help us survive for millions of years. We've only been talking for a couple of 100,000 years, and we've only been writing for about 9,000 years. And because we don't know how to listen anymore is one reason we're in such a parlous state in our relationships, in our health. Silence used to be taught in school until the 14th century. It was part of the curriculum. It was as important as learning the alphabet because you could organize your mind. Along about the end of the 13th century, beginning of the 14th century, the church banned silence. It was too subversive. Even today, Desmond Tutu says, if governments knew how subversive silence is, they would ban it. And the reason for this is, if you know how to practice silence, it will make you uncoercible. It will make you very autonomous. If we reintroduced silence in the schools, not in terms of prayer, not in terms of even meditation, but just gave students the last 5 minutes of a class to reflect on what had been done in that class. If we taught them how to memorize, I'll bet you that our educational system would be completely transformed.
I remember when I worked in radio many years ago as a producer, there was a story about one of the producers in another department who had been looking at the ratings, radio ratings for that month, and had discovered that November it was, that the ratings for the 2-minute silence were actually the highest in the whole month. And so he wrote to his head of department suggesting that instead of a 2-minute silence, it should be turned into 13.5 hours of silence, which he was fired, actually, rather tragic. Seemed very unfair, very good idea.
There's an Einstein story about the sort of silence. When he was at school, he got into trouble on one occasion for being a disruptive influence. And when his father went and asked what they meant by being a disruptive influence, the teacher said he sits at the back and smiles.
I must say, I'm very against televisions on the train and in the back of taxis and on buses. I like train journeys because you can be a bit quiet. I like the quiet carriage. I like the mobiles off. I like going away and no TV, radio, phone. It feels very relaxing. Am I in the right area? Because I feel a bit overstimulated.
Yeah.
But I like to be stimulated, but not when it's not part of my plan.
That's exactly it.
People are. But then you said earlier that you think that solitude is a human condition, but haven't we always lived in groups and families and villages and...
Oh yeah, but we're born alone and we die alone. I mean,
well, no,
from
you're born attached to your mother by a cord.
Yes.
And if she doesn't feed you within 2 hours, you will die.
But the cord gets cut. Yes.
Yeah, and then she has to feed you or you'll die.
So anyway, Bill, the obvious solution to where we put this, how much silence, by the way, approximately? If there are no people, there's silence, isn't there? Because sound is what's happening in our ear. So if there aren't any ears, there's no noise.
Does the tree make a noise in the forest when no one's listening?
Well, what would it be?
Yes.
Okay, well, I think the obvious suggestion as to where put this bit of silence, infinite amount of silence, Martha, is in the museum's library, along with a placard reading "Silence." And then we kill two birds with one stone. Thank you very much, Martha. Well, now it's time to sift through the museum's suggestion box and find out what our audience, the friends of the museum, consider to be essential exhibits that no curious museum should be without. A machine which creates ideas for really good new radio shows. He's put a name down as Leonardo da Vinci, age 9.
I've got a study into why women get hairier whilst men get balder as they age. I don't know what to make of this one at all. This is someone I won't say who it is, probably be embarrassed. This is my suggested curiosity is the diary of the man who first saw a cow's backside and thought, time to roll your sleeves up.
Well, anyway, that's it for this week. We've got 3 sparkling new additions to the museum's catalogue, the entire universe in a convenient fruity size, an infinite amount of silence, and 6,000 acres of ancient forest to put the museum in. And a final thought from you, Bill.
I'd like to end up with a quotation from the philosopher Bertrand Russell, who said, "A stupid man's report of what a clever man says can never be accurate, because he unconsciously translates what he hears into something he can understand." And what he's trying to say there is...
Thank you, and a very good day to you.
The Museum of Curiosity was created by John Lloyd and Bill Bailey, with research by James Harkin, Xander Cancel and QI. The exhibits were kindly donated by Alan Davis, Martha Reeves and John Gribbin, and the producers of Curiosity were Richard Turner and Dan Schreiber. If you're the curious sort and you'd like to snoop around the museum's exhibits and prod them, please make your way to the Radio 4 website, where you can find out more about the Museum of Curiosity.